Welcome to another episode of Defending the Line. I'm Christy Shepard, and this is my weekly podcast to share the story of what happened in the murder of my cousin Debbie Carter in our small Oklahoma town, and how finding out that the two men convicted of that crime were innocent, and how that turned into a quest for truth and accountability. In the last episode, I mentioned that we would continue to talk about the original case with Debbie and what we were told. And as I look through, the mountains of paperwork and articles and depositions, I really began to see how the Debbie Carter case shifts to not being about Debbie anymore. And what I mean by that is that once there were suspects in this case, it went from being about the Debbie Carter case to the Ron Williamson and the Dennis Fritz case. So to, again, like where she's not even mentioned by name, or the fact that she's always referred to as a barmaid, which just used to infuriate my family, as if that was, all that she ever was. But when you step back and you look at all the court records and how the case was investigated, it seems like Debbie Debbie as a person just became another piece of evidence like anything else, like the hairs or, the electric blanket cord or, any of those things that were labeled and cataloged, and the bits and pieces of things that were removed from her apartment. And it's so disheartening because this all started with her. This case was about her. And in all the books and the documentaries, none of it is about her. She's always kind of this side note. So, back to the original case. So, at this point, all the roads are leading to Ron Williamson. And in April of 1983, the Detective Smith reaches out to the criminal or the behavioral science unit of the FBI and asks them for assistance in this case, because they are, explaining that this, even though they know who did it, they really, I guess they're having a difficult time tying this case to their suspect. And so we didn't know who the FBI was. I mean, as far as this, behavioral science unit, we had no idea who they were or what they did. Now we have a little better understanding because there's, books and documentaries like Mindhunter and things like that. But at the time, we were just thrilled that, another agency, and certainly a higher up agency, was looking into her case. And so, again, it's kind of quiet, and there's, not a lot going on. But then Ada is hit with another devastating crime. And this was in April of 1984. And a young woman that was doing her student teaching disappeared from her job. And her name was Donna Denise Haraway, and she went by Denise, I believe. And while the cases aren't tied together at all, as far as having really anything to do with one another, other than how they were investigated and prosecuted later on. So I'm not going to talk a lot about that case, primarily because I think so often they're meshed together almost like one. And I know a lot of it is just by happenstance that, it was their names were Debbie and Denise, and they both had brown hair, and they were, relatively the same age. But I really think that they both deserve their own space and time. And like I said, while I will talk a great deal about her case later, just to give you a point of reference, though, so Denise disappears from her job in April of 1984. Within days, they have composite drawings of who they believed took her. So by October of 1984, they have video confessions. In November, Tommy Ward and Carl Fontenot are charged with her kidnapping and murder. By September of 1985, they're convicted of that crime without a body. And in January of 1986, though, Denise's remains were found, and none of the confessions that they had matched how and where Denise was found. And they're still fighting those cases today. All that to say that the Haraway case was wrapped up and, all tied up with a bow, not even 2 years later after Denise's disappearance. And there's really not a whisper about Debbie's case. I mean, she had kind of become this other girl. And in the meantime, my family is falling apart. Certainly Peppy, anyway. And I remember one instance that always sticks out in my mind where she had come to the house in the middle of the night. There was a, knock at the door, and my mom, quickly got up to go see what was going on. And I was right behind her, and Peppy was clearly, I remember she was slurring and kind of stumbling around, and she kind of stumbled off the porch, and she unbuttoned her jeans and just squatted and peed right in our front yard. And I was kind of taken back because I'd never seen her like that before. And I remember she had dirt on her clothes and in her hair. And that's because she had been out at the cemetery laying on Debbie's grave, just, praying for God to give her back. And I have no memory after that of what, I'm sure my mom brought her in the house, but I don't really remember if I was afraid of her or afraid for her. I just knew that it just wasn't her. And, this time we were really concerned why they were not arresting Ron Williamson. I mean, if they knew that he did it and they, had all this stuff on him, we just didn't understand how they could have convicted these other two. And Debbie's case, from, what we were learning, was just so clear. And so during this time, Ron goes to jail for what I believe it was a hot check. He actually goes to prison, and he got a pretty significant sentence. It was like 5 years or something. And it was explained to us that was their best effort at the time to get him off the streets, because that's all they could do at this time until they could wrap everything up with Debbie's case. And I remember when he got out of jail for that, because he still lived down the street, and I guess he didn't have a phone. And so he would come down the street and use our neighbor's phone. He knew my neighbor across the street, and he would use his phone. And we were scared to death of him because we just knew that he knew who we were. And I can remember how, I guess, when he would go down there, then he would go outside and sit on the curb and sit there and smoke, and he was facing our house. And so we were just sure that he was watching us. You know, now I look back, I don't even know if he knew who we were. But I remember the day he got out, because my mom had agreed to let me go to a football game, a Friday night football game. And that was a rarity for me. That was not something I got to do. And I certainly, if I ever got to go, was not allowed to run around and hang out in the end zones and stuff with my friends. I was not a frequent football fan until I was a high school cheerleader. But, you know, my mom was concerned that he would go to the game, because everybody, you know, went to the games on Friday nights. And, you know, I had strict instructions to sit with my friends' parents, and I was not to get up and that kind of thing. And I didn't argue about it. It's just, you know, it's just the way that things were. And so during this time also, the FBI profile comes back. And I guess it was more than a year later, just right at a year later, and Detective Smith had reported in the paper that while he would be keeping the profile, you know, confidential, that much of it complies with what is already known about the chief suspect, and that the profile goes as far to project the killer's age range, probably how he would dress, and the type of vehicle he would drive. So that was what I remember about that information being relayed to my family as well, that the profile from the FBI was that specific, and that all of those things pointed to Ron Williamson, which was just, you know, another, you know, nail in his coffin as far as knowing that he did this. And so again, there's not a lot even after that. There's really no mention of Debbie's case again for the better part of about 2 years. And what happens next was that Peppy gets a call. She had actually gotten off one morning and had gone home, and she gets a call from Detective Smith. And he asked her, he was kind of dramatic, and he asked her if she has a gun, and, you know, that she needs to hurry and get there. And so she, you know, knew that it was something, you know, big about the case. And so she gets in her car and puts the gun in the front seat and drives, you know, like a bat out of hell to the police station. And when she gets there, she is met with Detective Smith as well as the district attorney. His last name's Peterson, and she had never met him up to this point. But this is where they really kind of introduce Dennis Fritz and explaining that who he is and who he is to Ron, and that they feel like there was two. And I'd mentioned in the previous episode that there were no fingerprints, but there was a handprint. It was actually a partial handprint, kind of the side of, you know, like the side of your pinky finger down to the edge of your palm, that was found on the lower part of Debbie's bedroom wall. And they had actually cut that sheetrock out and had sent it to the OSBI to try to get a handprint, or a match off of it. And it had been, all this time, and they said it was just backlogged and things like that. And so what this meeting was about was to inform Peppy that when prints were first taken of Debbie, when, back in when she was murdered in 82, that they must have not gotten good prints. And that this handprint did not belong to Ron Williamson, and it did not belong to Dennis Fritz. And therefore it just had to be Debbie's. And they must have not gotten, good prints the first time. And so they explained to her that they need to exhume Debbie's body and retake the handprints. And Peppy immediately is like, no, we're not doing that. We're not going to disturb her. But he, to hear Peppy tell it, she says that, Peterson, the district attorney, really puts it back on her and says, well, do you want this case solved? And she says, I want this case solved more than anyone. And he's like, well, then you'll sign these papers. And then, according to Peppy, kind of tells her, like, well, really, I don't even have to ask you. That, her dad's already signed them. And I have no idea if that was true or not. I don't know. But they didn't ask her to come with anyone. They didn't ask her, they didn't call my mom or anyone to say, we need you to bring her down here. She was by herself. And so she leaves, she signs the papers, and she leaves the police station. And it was probably, 5-7 minute drive from there to my house. And she drives immediately to try to find my mom. And my mom happened to be at home at lunch that day. And she said she was in the kitchen, and she hears the garage door going up and down and up and down. And she thought, what in the world? So she goes into the garage, and Peppy is in the garage. And she's pushing the little button that makes the garage door go up and down. And she's so disoriented, she thinks she's at the front door. And she comes in, and she's just rambling and carrying on about how she is going to get the chance that nobody ever else gets. That she's going to get to see her, and that she's going to get to hold her. And my mom is just beside herself. She can't figure out what she's talking about. And so she finally, gets her calmed down and explains that, Peppy explains what's going to happen. And she is just obsessed with this idea that she is going to be there when they bring her out of the ground, and she is going to get to see her and hold her again. And my mom actually took her and had her admitted into a mental health facility. But by the time my mom got home, Peppy had already checked herself out and met my mom back at the house because she was not going to stay. And at that time, my mom told her, I can't do this with you every day. I can't relive this. I have a child and a job, and I can't go through this every day with you. And it was so sad to witness how my mom and Peppy had, they had survived their childhoods. They had been together through marriages and kids and divorce and even Debbie's murder. But the signing of those papers would be the thing that pushed Peppy over the edge. and sever the relationship with my mom. And they would never be the same again. And I'm not sure how much time passed, maybe a few weeks or so, that Peppy was actually at work, and a coworker came to her and asked what was going on out at the cemetery, that they had backhoes and stuff out there. And of course, Peppy knows immediately what is happening. And she clocks out of work and races across town. And when she gets there, there's no one there. There's just an open, empty hole. And she said she sat on the edge of the hole with her legs kind of hanging down, and just wondered what she looked like and how she was. And it's just so sad to think about how we bury someone and let someone go with such ceremony, and at some time in the next day or so, Debbie was lowered back into the ground and buried all over again. No family and no friends, no flowers. And there was no one there. And I think later Detective Smith told Peppy that, he was there because Peppy really wanted to know what she looked like. And that he said that it sounded like when they opened the vault, that it sounded like when you open a coffee can, that seal had been broken, and that she looked exactly the same. So in the next episode, we'll continue to talk about the exhumation of Debbie and how that shifted not just everything in the case, but also in my family as well. So again, you can go to defendingtheline.com for other information and updates, as well as Defending the Line on Instagram. And I thank you for listening.